Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Loom Press Poetry Podcast. It's been a while, but it's good to be back. With us today, we have Dublin poet Tony Curtis, and he's going to be here talking today about, well, I suppose his whole poetic journey from start to finish, I guess,
Yeah.
and his some of his latest material as well. So, welcome, Tony. Thanks for coming on.
Hello, Lee. Yeah, thanks for inviting me onto your was this podcast or
Podcast. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Don't forget I'm old now, so
Oh, sure. Well, look, we're keeping you up with the time, so,
okay.
um, but well, you might be old, but you're still going, you're still working away anyway, and
Well, yeah, that's right. All poets never die, just lose their faculties. Yeah, we just keep going, you know. There's nothing else to do. I have a poem about that. When on my 60th birthday, I wrote a poem about the last poem. Would you like to hear a poem? I'll do about
oh
being an
yeah,
old poet. Yeah, then maybe
absolutely,
we'll
yeah,
start with
absolutely.
a poem. Give you a feel for me while I'm like uh, on my 60th birthday. I was in Washington State,
Hmm.
and I was watching the ferry going from Port Townsend on one side of the channel over to the other side. This old, uh, like the old freighters and all the ships. And I thought that's like me going from harbour to harbour, poetry reading to poetry reading. So I wrote a poem called Fair Weather. And when I came home, I finished it. The last stanza is in my out here near Skerries. So it was on the harbour in Skerries when I said hello to a incoming sailor, uh, which I got all wrong. So this is a little poem. Fair weather. Do poets ever reach their destination? I ask not because I think they are like country buses, though their minds are often overcrowded, and they do tend to take the long way around. I ask because any I've ever met have been uneasy, watchful, just arrived or just about to leave, restless as the postman on his bicycle. In truth, I was thinking of ships, rusted old cargo ships, especially those you see late at night out beyond the bay, their light fading, their cargo a mystery, their destination unknown. Too late, alas, to wish the captain fair weather. Last week, at the end of the pier, I hailed a sailor. Welcome home. I know, he said. We docked last night. We're heading out. The end of a voyage is the beginning of a voyage. I wished him fair weather. As I watched his frail craft batter the wind, I thought, it's the same for poets. The end of a poem is the beginning of a poem. And so I ask again, do poets ever reach their destination?
Very good,
Do poets ever reach their destination? Yeah.
very good. It kind of reminds me of Beckett. I remember hearing, or did I read somewhere before that, even up to his very last, he was still, as the person said, I think it was a documentary. They said he kept chipping away
Oh,
at
yeah.
the
Yes.
human condition. And
Yeah.
even unto his last, he was writing these little kind of poems,
Yeah.
strange minimalist poems. But yeah, yeah, it reminds me of that a bit. Just
He was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And Beckett, yeah, he never did really big, but he was doing smaller, smaller, like down right down to a breath.
mm,
He's probably my favorite writer, Samuel Beckett.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. He's
I
interesting
love,
because I think he was very kind of close to Joyce in his sort of in his formative years, and I
yeah,
think he aspired to be like Joyce, and Joyce is everything. But then Beckett
yeah,
realized I can't do that. I can't do everything. So then he started
yeah.
doing nothing. He went in the opposite
That's
direction.
what he said. No, he said Joyce is omnipotent, right?
Yeah.
He's like you said, he's the creator of everything, omnipotent. I will deal with uh, ignorance and impotence. And he said he walked to the end of the pier. He was walking on the end of the pier in Dunleary, and he had this idea. And as the ship went out towards England, he roared after the ship, I will deal from now on with ignorance and impotence and the downtrodden. And
Mm.
he never did that journey. And he always said for the rest of his life, every time it was mentioned that he walked to the end, he said, I never walked to the end of the pier. I put it in a book that I walked. I made it up. I had the idea in my mother's house in Greystones. But he
Oh, he
said,
never
no,
actually did. What? He never did walk.
no, he made it up.
All
you
right.
know,
I thought
uh,
because yeah, that's interesting because I thought that was actually quite similar to the poem that you just read there about the whole
yeah,
pier.
no,
Oh,
yeah, no, he didn't do the walk. No, no. I
yeah.
take an awful lot of my poems. A lot of my poems come from from living. That poem is a lived poem. The same as my poem is about going to mental institutions or prisons. Or I tend to make turn my life into poetry. The things that happen to me, I think it gives them a better edge if the stuff has happened to you.
Just on that, actually, about the mental institute and the asylums that you've been in before. I was looking over your collection. This is now not your most recent one. This is came out in 2015, but approximately in the QC. And the inscription is interesting because it says the inscription reads from John Clare. I have a friend I value here, and that's a quiet mind.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of the poem In the Wilderness.
Yeah, that's the one.
Moses.
Yeah, in the Wilderness is a classic example of turning my life into poetry, because I was doing a poem. I do a two-hander poem from my book Pony by Tony. This book here, Pony by Tony, and I had a poem in this. That's a two-hander. I usually do it with school children, 5-year-old school children, whereas I say to the children, have you like a horse? If you get children from Dublin, they go out to Connemara and say, that's a lovely horse, boss. But it's not a horse. It's a pony, Connemara pony, an entirely different creature altogether. It's like the difference between a wasp and a bee.
Yeah.
If you ever heard Sherlock Holmes treatise on the difference between a wasp and the same as, and so I did this poem, and I needed somebody in the asylum to help me read it. And this guy stood up, and I'd been talking about Abraham Lincoln, and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Moses." Right? And I said to him,
"You don't come by too many Moseses these days."
No, but I said to him, I always knew the Irish Moses would end up in a mental institution trying to lead the Irish to the promised land. He read this poem with me, and I'll just do this. And this is what I wrote this for children in schools in Dublin, so they know the difference between a horse and a Connemara pony, and it's a two-hander. So I'll do the two voices. And it's a list poem, the simplest type of poem to write. So I just name the parts of the pony and then say why they're different to horses. You will know a pony by its ears, listening out for weather forecasts and love songs, by its mane, tossed over its eyes like a witch's broom, by its coat, always buttoned up, tight-fitting, dusty, well-worn, by its eyes, that look at you and look at you again to take you in, by its hooves, made for dancing and so worn at the tips, by its mouth, that loves to eat words given with pats of the hand, by its nose, that knows you and lifts the pony's head to let it know you're coming, by its tail, that conducts a symphony of bird song, lake song, light song. There's the bog underfoot here above the village of Roundstone. So myself and Moses read this poem, right?
Very good.
And then I said to the audience, "Are you really Moses?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm really Moses." And he had something written on his T-shirt that was absolutely brilliant.
Oh yeah, the Twitter.
I said to him, "Between you and that T-shirt, when I come here next week with that, because I have a fondness for." My father made the gates to the Central Mental Hospital, big brass gates. And it's kind of sad now that they moved from Dundrum out to Portrane. I don't know what will happen to the gates. I presume they'll take them down. And every time I went by, Francis Stewart, the Irish writer, his house, he lived facing the gates of the mental institution, which must have been a great comfort to him. Because you always hear Becca talking about that. It's great to go up on Feltram Hill near Malahide and then look out across the estuary at the Portrane Asylum, because it's a great comfort to know it's there, just in case.
Just in case, yeah.
He said, well, Becca's line was, "All are born mad, some remains." Yeah. And
was he said that? I thought it was who was it? Or maybe I'm thinking the genie. We're all born geniuses or something. Maybe that was Picasso.
That's not Picasso. Yeah, but poor poets imitate, great poets steal.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But it's just what I thought was curious was the inscription of the quiet mind from John Clare. links into the end of the in the wilderness.
Yeah, this is what this is all I do. I write the poem on what happened to me, and then I just give it who said that? Robert Frost said, anybody can begin a poem. It's very hard to finish a poem.
Mm.
Yeah, anybody can get into a poem. It's hard to get out of a poem. And that was my out, was that to take a line from John Clare. I love John Clare.
Yeah.
And I name in the card, there's Gordon Tyrrell has recorded his poems, set them all to music. Not them all, set some of them to music. And he does a great thing between each poem set to music. He plays a tune that John Clare wrote down himself. John Clare was a very fine, his grandfather was an itinerant fiddler, and he was a fiddler, and he could write down music, and he'd write down the tunes. And Gordon Tyrrell took the tunes and always said, and the musicians in the band said to me, he was a good musician, because the tunes are all standard tunes, but his versions are wonderful. Mm. So I love him, but so in the wilderness, I met Moses in the asylum, in a yellow room that smelt of sorrow, giving up the sweeping robes and carrying a wooden staff. He was wearing denims and a t-shirt that said, "Follow me on Twitter." In his small way, he was still leading lost souls out of the wilderness. When he stood up, he was smaller than I had imagined. Together we read a poem about Connemara ponies. Blessed creatures, he said they were. He had the deepest brown eyes, but it is his voice I will remember. It was 10,000 miles of dusty roads. It was a parched riverbed, a dried out well, more broken twigs than biblical thunder. When I was leaving, he handed me a scrap of paper with 2 lines written out in pencil. I have a friend I value here, and that's a quiet mind. It was his map out of the wilderness. Yeah. Most people, when they think about asylums, they think of this idea of a lunatic. But most people who are in mental institutions, the people I've met over the last 30 years, are people whose lives are blown to bits sad. Blown to bits sad. One day the Queen came to visit Ireland. I remember she came that famous weekend, and she went to the Garden of Remembrance and had a big dinner in Dublin Castle with Seamus Heaney and everybody. And then she went to the up there at past Euston Station, up to the War Memorial or the War Graves. And she was walking around the graves, looking at all the graves. And I was in the Central Mental Hospital amongst a pile of men, about 50 men, who were all still lost in no man's land. And
wow.
yeah, about that.
Did Moses ever? Did he ever? I don't know. Did he ever find out or that you wrote that?
Yeah. I read the poem from a couple of weeks later. Yeah, I read the poem from delighted to be in a book. Some of the poems you don't say back. The poem I wrote called "Two Faces by a Window," the one I wrote, a woman in the asylum asked me to do something for her, and I said I would do it. What she asked me to do was to light a candle. She was on suicide watch. She had a baby, had postnatal depression, and killed a baby. And when she got a bit better and realized what she'd done, she tried to kill herself. It was just, and it's blown to bits sad life. And then I was sitting down with her talking, and she asked me would I go to a church and light a candle. And I'm not the most religious person in the world. I come steeped in religion. My father's 3 brothers were Cistercian monks, and my father made church furniture. Anything you see inside a church: tabernacles, chalices, monstrance, baptismal fonts. So I don't need to go to church. I still go to church. I still like to light candles. And yeah.
It's a great place to facilitate a quiet mind, the church, I think.
Yes, church, yeah, it was nice. Yeah. I used to love, when we were kids, we used to go down to the monastery where my father's brothers were, down in Mount St. Joseph and Rosscray. So I have that. When she said to me, would I light a candle for the baby, the woman asked me and I said I would. And I kind of forgot about it. And then I did, and I was sitting there, as you said, sitting in the church with the little candles. It's something I wouldn't do too often, but I was doing that. And then the following Tuesday or Wednesday, I was going back. And just as I came to the Dundrum shopping centre, which is a far madder establishment than other places, and I was going by that, and a politician came on the radio and he said, if the economy keeps going the way it's going, they'll be sending men in white coats for us. And the men in the white coats is kind of the Laurel Hardy idea of an asylum. Come and get you. And I said to myself in the car driving along, there speaks a man who's never been inside the walls of an asylum, because you would never compare the economy to the people I meet, whose lives are blown to bits, especially the woman I met. And just as my car rolled near to the kind of the Gulliver Travels bridge for the Lewis of the Dart, as I stopped at the lights, just like that, a poem came into my head, and I said, two faces by a window. In all the years I've been going to asylums, I've never once seen a white coat. Although there was that time, young Lisa, inside, for smothering her baby and then slitting her own wrists, asked if next time I was in church, I would light a candle for the infant. I told her I didn't go to church, but I would. And I remember as we sat there, two faces by a window, lost in the ruins of a spent conversation. The grass outside was covered in snowdrops, 1,000 white coats trying to save us from ourselves.
Wow.
What's funny about that poem was it takes longer to say than it did to write.
You're right,
because the red and the green light, and I didn't need there was no paper involved in that.
They're the best poems, I think, the purest poems,
The purest, they just come, and there's not but I'm just, and that was just again an example of just turning my life into something that happened, just turning my life into poetry. It's this meeting like that. If I hadn't never met that woman, I would have never written that poem. In the same way as if I had never met Moses, or like even the Connemara poem. I wrote the Connemara poem. The pony book came about because Ballynahinch Castle rang me up and asked me would I write a poem, would I write a book of poems about Connemara ponies. I thought it was the funniest thing. And
strange. Am I right in saying as well that they reached out to you about your latest book, this flight tonight?
Yeah, where's that? I have that here somewhere. It's here. Oh, there. This is this one. This is this flight tonight.
So I have to ask because I have to say I haven't read it, but it's about a captain.
It's John Alcock and Arthur Whittenbrown.
And did you have an interest in their lives before writing that?
I always have. For the last last 30 years, I've been going to Clifton and to the Arts Festival, and then continuously for the last 25 years, I've been going to the Arts Festival. And myself and my dear friend who died last week or 2 weeks ago now, Michael Cody, the great poet from Carrick-on-Suir, we used to be like a double act. We were like Laurel Hardy. We were like Alcock and Brown. We used to do the festival together. We'd be there for 10, 12 days. And we do schools and introductions and readings and all sorts to carry on. And then he died a few weeks ago, and then he's been ill for the last few years. So I gave up doing Clifton because it wasn't the same. It was like I was like Laurel going around without Hardy. I was like Alcock without Brown. And but where the book came about was one day you had the great Dominican nun Margaret McCurtain came to read and talk about her life at the festival, at the Arts Festival, and her life in academia and religion. And she was absolutely powerhouse, big mind, big brain, brilliant she was. And afterwards, she said to myself and Michael and Moya Cannon, the other poet, would you take me out to where Alcock and Brown landed? And I said, sister, it's a big hike out over the bog. I'd take you up to the tail of the plane. It was a very funny day because I was driving the car and they were all in the car, 4 of us, going along. And then I'm thinking to myself, sister has been up on stage for the last 2 hours talking, right? And we're into our 3rd hour now, and there's no where I'm taking the nun, right, is out onto the bog where there's no trees. It's like the moon, very beautiful, but there's no tree, no facilities. So I said to her, sister, we'll just pull into this hotel here on the way, right? We can all use the facilities before we head out onto the bog. It was a really funny day. So in we go. And I said to her, would you like a cup of tea or a mineral sandwich? And she says, I'm with three poets. I'll have a glass of champagne. Now, she didn't want a glass of champagne.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make the point that just because I'm a nun, don't be asking me, do I want a cup of tea? You know, that was great. And so we went out, and then we went up onto the Erislannon Road and out to where the tail of the plane, which put up for the 50th anniversary of the flight. So in 1969, they put this great tail of a plane, and you look out over the bog. And as we stood there, she said to me, where were they born? Where were the Alcock Brown from? And I said, John Alcock was from Old Trafford in Manchester United. And Arthur Whitten Brown was from Glasgow. And she, cleverest woman in Ireland, said, I always thought they were American. It was very funny. And I said, geez, Margaret, if you're the cleverest woman in Ireland and you think they're from America, what do the stupid people think? And really funny. And by that I meant the little people in primary school.
Yeah.
And then she says to me, what day did they land? And I never thought about it until I said it out loud into the air. They landed on the 15th of June, 1919. And that was the first day I thought to myself, where would two men have been, two aviators have been for the previous 5 years? Of course, they were in the war. And they were both captured, both in prison camps for 2 years. And Arthur Whitten Brown was given back by the Germans as not likely to survive. He was given back to the Swiss. And John Alcock only escaped, or only came back because he had been shot down flying the only long-range bomber over Turkey. So every bomb that was dropped on Turkey during a certain period was only dropped by this plane, because there was only one plane in the area. So so all the Turkish soldiers knew that this was the man who was dropping the bombs on them. And it's funny that when he swam ashore, he thought they'd riddle him, but they didn't. They stripped him and marched him naked through the rest of the. I think it's what the British did to Joseph Mary Plunkett. I think it's the humiliation. We've captured him, but he got malaria and things like that. But he survived, and but when he came back from the war, he was still very young, and you couldn't say to him, welcome home, because all he would say was, no man comes home from war.
Yeah.
I think there's a survival thing. They talk about survivor guilt. But if 5,000 pilots have died and you've trained the half of them before you flew off yourself, it must have been like an awful lot of death for such a young man.
Yeah. I think it's incredible as well, because it's a biographical book, but it's written through poems, which is unusual.
Yeah, poems, prose, notes. I have the flight notebook from the flight.
Oh wow!
And I did it all. Yeah, and then the funniest thing was when I did the book, I didn't want to see the plane, because I said if I see the plane, it's like when I went to see the other day. I went to see the John McGahern, That They May Face the Rising Sun. Right?
Yeah.
And I read the book. I was trying to figure out when I read the book. About 20 years ago, I read the book. I saw John McGahern reading from the manuscript in the National Gallery of Ireland. And I remember that, and he was talking about, this is my next book. I've been writing it for 11 years. And when I went to see the film the other day, it was a beautiful film, but they're taking a poem and turning it into a story. If you know what I mean. It's still beautiful. Yeah. But for a person who likes whang whop, it's smack bang wallop. This is not what you get. It's almost the antithesis of a Hollywood movie. It's a little piece of Ireland. It's very beautiful. The music is very beautiful.
Yeah. It's
so this, yeah.
What was I going to say there? It's you said, I remember when I was talking to you recently as well, you said it nearly killed you writing the book.
Oh, you really cute. It's huge, yeah. My wife kept saying to me, don't stop talking about the book. You'll have no friends left. But yeah, my point by earlier was that I was going to say that when I saw the movie, in my head, I had a picture of all the characters. You forget that when you read a book, you put your own faces on the characters and what they're alive. And it was the same when if I saw the plane, I was worried that if I saw Alcock Brown's plane, it mightn't be in any way what I have in my head. And the day I finished the manuscript and sent it off, I got the plane to England, first flight out, and I was standing outside the museum, Science Museum. And when it opened at 10 o'clock, I barreled in and went down to the back of the museum, and there was the plane. It was like the iceberg meeting the Titanic. It was amazing, and I could put my hands on it, and I knew everything about it. Theoretically, I'd never seen it, but I knew. But it was even. I could not believe that this was they took off in this. I recommend everybody goes and sees it.
Yeah,
because everything about the journey, everything about their trip, they carry the first airmail. Every airmail letter you get, the very first one came from Alcock and Brown's flight that day, 15th of June, 1919. The first airmail stamp was them on the stamp. It was loads of stuff came out of that. The technological advance was huge, and the First World War, the advancement in technology during the First World War, and then through the Second World War. Wars are great for invention and
advancement. Yeah.
You see that in the American Civil War, which I write about too. The things that advanced at the first war in the Civil War, American Civil War, people brought tables and chairs and full dinner to watch the men fighting each other. They had this idea of jolly swords, but by deeper into the war, when they were putting two cannons together and putting a chain between the cannons and firing the chain across, so cut the men in half, nobody anymore was going to see. Look at the spectacle.
Wow.
Yeah, even Robert E. Lee said that. Tis whatever he said, paraphrase it. Tis good war is terrible, else we might get to like it. It's terrible.
I read something yesterday, actually. I don't know who it was from, but it was someone saying, I actually came across it on Instagram, but it was basically the quote, I'm paraphrasing now, but it was something like, you wouldn't, war would not be declared if the person declaring it was looking into the glazed eyes of a soldier dying on the battlefield. They think twice about it then. So, it's kind of like, what's his name, Siegfried Sassoon as well, with Base Details, that poem, if you're familiar with that one. The whole thing of it's always older men that declare war, and then it's up to the young to fight.
It's what do you call him? He's in my book, the other lad, Wilfred Owen. Because Wilfred Owen, I forget why he's in the book. He's in the book because, but he
must have known him, did he, in some capacity, or did
there's two poets in the book. The man, McCrae, the Canadian doctor who wrote In Flanders Fields. The poppies grow in Flanders Fields. The great. He's in it. He was a doctor, going around on a horse, Napoleon, and he'd go along the lines to make sure everybody was in tip-top shape before they ran out to the guns, which is really funny. Because if he came along to me and said, "How are you, Tony?" before the charge, I'd be like,
exactly.
It's very funny though. You have
it's bizarre, really.
There for about 2 minutes as you step up, and the other thing, all these funny little things. I have a million threads. You could talk about that book, but where Alcock and Brown, you see, the plane was sent over from Southampton, from London on a ship in 27 crates, and then assembled in 9 days in this field of Kitty Viddy. But where the Newfoundland first, they had no army, but they put together an army because the men wanted to go off and meet French women. So they put together an army, but they put it together in the field at Kitty Viddy, the very same field as Alcock and Brown assembled the plane.
Amazing. Well, fair play to you for having especially I imagine, like, it's one thing writing a biography, but doing it through poems, that's like it's really like creative nonfiction, or isn't it?
Colin McCann wrote a story about Alcock and Brown, but I was fascinated about how he could hold it all in his head. Obviously, completely different. Like, I'm more of obviously, as a poet, you see yourself more as a sprinter, not a long distance marathon runner like the novelists. So he was saying to me, "How did you do it, Tony?" And I said, "I stuck it each poem on the wall of one of the rooms in the house. So for 3 or 4 years, I took up this wall. My wife wasn't too pleased because she lost the wall.
Yeah.
But now with the new book I'm writing about Philip McCracken, the sculptor, she says you better start using the wall because you don't know where you are. It's to get the beginning of the life, the middle of the life, and the end of the life. And
Yeah, I think Kavanagh used to use his the rug in the middle of his room as a filing system. He'd have the pages all sort of jutting out from under his rug.
oh yeah, that's very handy. I do that too. Put them on the floor, and then you can actually see where I move them around. Yeah.
It's great to have that space, I suppose. Yeah, and I suppose not it's fantastic. But I'm just conscious if we've about 8 minutes left. I have to ask you about. I'd love you to tell the story you told me about Seamus Heaney, your last encounter with or the last time you remember. I think meeting Seamus.
The last time I met Seamus, it was, you see, because Dennis O'Driscoll died on Christmas Eve, and myself and Dennis had been on the Joe Duffy show following previous Wednesday, and then Dennis died, and then Seamus did the oration at Dennis's funeral, and he was saying that he always thought that Dennis would do his oration, not the other way around. But he said every time he published a book, Dennis would always come to the house and get Seamus to sign it. And he says it's amazing how many books of Dennis's he has that he didn't get signed. You forget that because he's so person's younger than you. You think, well, he'll be around. And so it got me thinking. And I looked at all my books of Seamus's, and I had Electric Light, and it wasn't signed. So I put it in my bag, and I started carrying it around with me in my bag. And a couple of months later, I met him at an event in UCD, and I said, "Will you sign my book?" Now his hands were shaking at this stage from tablets he was taking for he's had a stroke years previous, and he signed my book. Took me a little while. I just put by Seamus Heaney. But then as I putting the book away, he looked down into my bag and he says to me, "Tony, is that the American copy of the book?" And I says, "I know it." And I couldn't tell from looking down at the book. He could, and he picked it and I took it out. And we've been talking for about 5 minutes and about life, and I was telling him about the book was typeset in Birkenhead. I knew the book inside out from reading it for 2 months, and it is a beautiful book, Electric Light, with a very fun cover. And so then he took it and he signed it again, but this time he summoned up his strength and he wrote something very, very nice on the book. And then as he stood up and he put on his little hat and he looked at me because of the way I dressed. I always dress the same, and he says that, "One thing I have to say, Tony, you're always dressed for a wedding or a funeral." And that's the last thing he said to me, because then a few weeks later in August,
Wow.
he died. Yeah, in the forest of poetry, great oak has fallen. Yeah, what we said that.
Yeah, you said that. Did you? I read you. I remember coming across that in
I
the
put it in a poem. Yeah, I put it in a poem, and then the next, so I put it in my book. In that you'll see the poem, because I woke up in the morning and that morning I turned on the radio and Yvonne was on the radio, Yvonne Boland, and she was talking in the past about Seamus. He will be remembered, all that, and I was saying Yvonne's gone mad. I thought she'd lost her mind.
Oh yeah,
as if he was Thomas Hardy.
because you hadn't realized he died.
No, I hadn't. And then penny dropped, and in the forest of poetry, the great oak has fallen. That's what I said to myself. And then the next page was, because the book was set in Birkenhead. What my memory of Birkenhead is where the 2 lads who climbed, the first 2 men to climb Everest, Mallory and Irvin, they were from Birkenhead. I always thought it was funny that 2 lads from Birkenhead, which is right at water level, at sea level.
Yeah.
They went 5 miles up in the air to climb. They were last seen 200 feet from the top, going strong. I always believe they got to the top, but you can go to their houses in Birkenhead.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
Mary used to climb out the window, one room of his bedroom. Yeah. So
So you got all his signed collections or all his books signed in the end.
Yeah, and I was a lovely man. And then Mary put together the book of the poems she read. She put together a beautiful book. She did this little book. She had on the shelf, which is poems that the poems and lullabies that she read after Seamus died, to grieve and to mourn and to laugh or whatever. And she put my poem, a small little poem that had been on the back of whatever this when I was a child. It was kind of funny because I this little thing here, and she stuck a title on it and made it a much better poem and bigger poem than it was at the back. When I was a child, my grandmother told me, unlike the sun and the moon, the North Star never moves. So what does it do? I asked. Well, she said, it hangs around all night like a poet, drinking in the darkness, making its own light for the joy of others, like you and me. Simple as that.
And she said I'd love to include this poem, and you didn't recognize it as your own. You said, I didn't write that.
I'd forgotten. I didn't. I wrote it in a flash again. I wrote it very quickly on the back of a manuscript because I had written this other funny poem. So that's a long story. I don't waste your 8 minutes telling that. But I had forgotten. I wrote that almost in pencil on the back of the manuscript, the final thought. I often begin my books with children's poems. Like Robert Frost began his books with a very simple poem, because things can only get better. And then to end it, like the end of my book, Folk, is a children's poem. I keep thinking there are cobwebs between the pages of this book, but you've been good enough to open it and blow.
Oh, very good.
That's how it ends. And then the Alcock and Brown book begins with, what goes up must come down. This we learned from Alcock and Brown, who stole it from the birds, who took it from the autumn leaves, who saw today a boy stepped onto the grass with his kite and let the wind take it up and away. So the book starts with that poem for children and it ends with that poem, with one slight change. What goes up must come down. This we learned from Alcock and Brown, who stole it from the birds, who took it from the autumn leaves, who saw the day two boys stepped onto the grass with their kite and let the wind take it up and away. You know, their plane wasn't much more than a kite.
Yeah. Well, I think we've just over a minute left. But Tony, thanks for
Thank you
this evening.
Yeah, time flew by. But,
it did, yeah. Geez, we can nearly have another meeting because it's there's a lot to sort of talk about. But wonderful to meet you anyway, and hope the new book goes well anyway. And
we'll see how it goes. I never got to read one of them poems, but it doesn't matter. Another time.
Next time.
Please. The new ones I liked, similar to the old ones.
Very good. Right. Anyway, thanks for joining us today, guys. We'll hopefully have another podcast soon. And thanks again to Tony. And
thank you, Liam. Thanks on your work. Thanks, Frank.